Tonight, we're getting you reaction from Belmont residents after tests found high levels of PFAS, a likely carcinogen, in their bloodstream. Target 8 broke this story at 5. The tests found off-the-chart levels in one woman from Belmont, along with extremely high levels in a toddler.
Target 8 investigator Ken Kolker is back tonight after talking with people who live near Wolverine Worldwide's Old House Street dump. Ken?
Yeah, the numbers are remarkable. In fact, one expert we talked to called one of the test results breathtaking. Seth and Tobin McNaughton are struck by this. The chemicals dumped decades ago by Wolverine Worldwide are now in the blood of their 20-month-old son.
He's so small, and it's, you know, we love him so much, and to have him have that amount of chemical in him is just horrible.
Tests, they say, found 484,000 parts per trillion of PFAS in little Jack's blood. That's almost as high as the levels found in groundwater at Wolverine's former tannery site in Rockford. Jack's mom says she collapsed when she heard the number.
And I said, in his tiny little body, and I just grabbed him and I started crying.
They live across US 131 from the Old House Street dump where Wolverine buried PFAS-tainted sludge until 1970. It has since contaminated wells, including the McNaughtons. They now wonder if the water somehow caused Jack's constant colds and ear infections.
His immune system, is it being affected, and just the thoughts and fears of future illnesses or cancer is on our mind.
Dr. Paul Brooks, who led the blood testing of 69,000 people after a PFAS crisis in West Virginia, says he did not find such high levels in children down there.
Oh, it's way high.
But he was shocked by the PFAS readings in the blood of a Belmont woman, Sandy Wynn Stelt, who lives right across the street from the dump and whose well was full of the chemical. Her blood tested at 5 million parts per trillion.
She'd never get it out of her system as long as she lives.
He says PFAS is active in the human body at 5,000 parts per trillion.
A small amount triggers about the same biological effect as a large amount.
Sandy Wynn Stelt fears the worst.
It meant a lot to me, yeah. Now that I'm hearing I'm breathtaking, and not in a good way, yeah, I mean, it makes you start reevaluating everything. You know, is this going to kill me? That's what I want to know.
As for the McNaughtons, they say new carbon filters paid for by Wolverine have nearly eliminated PFAS, but they still won't drink their well water.
Our dream home, you know, to start our family and have family planning and kids, and now, you know, we're freaked out about having another kid, and it just sucks.
Some health officials have questioned whether blood tests are necessary for PFAS. These tests were paid for by attorneys representing families against Wolverine. Now, the Kent County Health Department has said anybody with questions about blood tests should talk to their doctors.
Ken, you can hear the frustration, you can hear the fear in their voices. Talk about what PFAS does once it's in your body and you continue to consume it. You had an analogy earlier.
It was like, it's like snowfall. It keeps falling and falling, and it's not warm enough to melt. PFAS accumulates in the body, and it takes
can't flush it out of you.
It takes a long time to flush it out, yeah.
How frightening then the future for all of these people, because they're not sure what's ahead.
Exactly.
Unreal.
Okay, Ken Kolker, thank you. We have told you about PFAS, a likely carcinogen, and the contamination in drinking wells throughout Kent County.
But how much PFAS has tainted families for years, possibly decades? The results of the few blood tests so far are shocking, including high levels of PFAS in a 20-month-old boy. Tonight, Target 8 investigator Ken Kolker explores the debate over blood testing, getting his own test done, and learns how the state is now considering area-wide blood draws. Ken.
Yeah, Marley and Brian, this growing crisis involving Wolverine Worldwide contamination has sparked a growing debate between health experts and those hit the hardest, the neighbors who until recently drank that tainted water. Hi, how are you?
Can I help you?
Yeah, I'm here. Let's get a PFAS test.
Okay.
I've got this
everything
kit.
in there? Okay.
I guess the ice.
Yep, and it's all frozen solid for us?
Yep.
Good deal. I'm going to have you turn the camera off at this point in time.
I grew up in the city of Rockford until I was 8.
This is it, 179 Highland.
That's me on my front porch with my big sister and Buck Berry, an old TV cowboy. That was 50 years ago. Until 2000, Rockford got its city water from the Rogue River, 2 blocks downstream from the Wolverine Worldwide Tannery, which is still soaked in PFAS that flows to this day into the river. PFAS was in the Scotchgard that Wolverine used to treat shoes from 1958 to the early 2000s. So there's a good chance I drank PFAS back then.
There seems to be only one logical conclusion, that people were drinking a lot of contaminants in the water that maybe nobody realized were there, but that's the fact.
Getting a PFAS blood test isn't very complicated. The Kent County Health Department has steps to follow on its website, even though it doesn't recommend it. But it's pricey.
This is Analytical. This is Jennifer.
Oh, hi, Jennifer. Hey, my name is Ken Kolker. I'm from Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Hi, Ken.
How are you?
Vista Analytical in California, one of the few labs testing blood for PFAS.
I'm wondering if I should just go ahead and order the kit.
They prefer the money up front, $150 for the kit, $525 for the test, $675 total by credit card. Insurance won't cover it.
How long before the test results are done, generally?
I really, we've been very busy for the past several months with this type of testing. Worst case scenario, 2 months.
In a few days after I got a required doctor's order, the kit arrived. A small styrofoam cooler, a test tube for my serum, and ice packs. It's into the freezer. Then several hours later, off to the lab.
Hi.
An hour after that, my blood was drawn and ready for delivery.
So here is the cooler packed on ice that, oh boy, holds my serum. I'm gonna make sure I pack this back the way it was. And there it is right there. There's the blood serum. Hey, I've got to ship out a PFAS blood sample. Okay. I'm sure you've got a few of these.
Yep.
Overnight to Vista Analytical. The serum's got to stay cold. Only a handful of people in Kent County's growing PFAS zones have done this, in part because the health department says it's not necessary.
What that has largely told us is that blood testing is not very useful for us.
Most health officials, the county, the state, the feds, say PFAS blood tests won't make you easier to treat. They say blood tests are not needed to prove you have PFAS in your system. If you drink contaminated water, they say, it's in your blood.
You're going to have a measurable, a significant level of this in your system. If you've been drinking that water, that's pretty much a given.
It accumulates and stays there for years.
I would never stop anybody from getting their blood tested. It's a limiting right now for clinicians or healthcare providers to estimate what the health impacts may be.
Jim Watts isn't buying that. He's lived near the House Street dump for 30 years, but has only low levels of PFAS in his well. At least, that's what his one and only recent test has shown. Blood tests, he says, if they come back high, might show if his well's PFAS levels were higher before.
If you look at the map of how all this is spreading out, we're right dead in the center. We could have been much higher in the past. We just don't know because that was never tested for that.
He wants blood tests for his family, especially his wife, who has environmental asthma.
2 tanks here.
He wonders if it's from using a humidifier for years, filling their bedroom with PFAS-tainted mist.
And I think that, frankly, the health department and Wolverine should step up to the plate and deal with this. I think they owe it to the residents here in this community.
In West Virginia, doctors tested the blood of 69,000 people for PFAS after a crisis there, linking the chemical to 6 diseases: testicular and kidney cancers, ulcerative colitis, thyroid problems, high cholesterol, and hypertension in pregnancy. How bad is this stuff?
Bad.
But the PFAS levels here are much higher than they were in West Virginia.
Everybody that's in that area needs to be tested and followed.
Blood tested?
Yeah, blood tested and followed.
I've always said if you have data, you can make decisions.
Sandy Winstelt, who lives across from Wolverine's old polluted House Street dump, has 5 million parts per trillion of PFAS in her blood, the most that local and state officials have ever heard of. She drank the water for 24 years. Her husband died of cancer, and she's had thyroid problems. Now she says her doctor knows what else to look for.
And I sure may die of something totally unrelated. But at least I'm going to be able to know confidently that I looked at all the things that we do know are connected, so I can address those quickly.
Tobin McNaughton was shocked when local health officials said that blood tests were not needed. Her 20-month-old son, Jack, who is often sick with colds and ear infections, has 484,000 parts per trillion in his blood, almost as much as the groundwater at Wolverine's old tannery.
Saying that, these things aren't necessary, it's hard to hear those words, because I feel like everything having to do with Jack's health is necessary.
She says her son's toxicologist is using her son's test results.
The toxicologist said for the rest of Jack's life, he's under his surveillance.
As for my test, the results won't be in until March. Question is, will I have the same low levels as the average American? Almost everybody has some in them. PFAS used to be in Teflon, sprayed on furniture and carpeting, used on fast food wrappers. So I grew up in Rockford until I was 7 or 8. I'm 58 now. I got my blood tested for PFAS yesterday.
Did you? Okay.
What would you expect me to find?
I would expect that you're going to have a measurable amount of PFAS.
The same as everyone else? Or do you think...
Hard to say. I'll be fascinated to hear from you if you're willing to share those when you get those.
Now, the state told us it's working with the CDC to develop a new health study in the Rockford and Belmont area that could actually include widespread blood testing that could help the nation learn more about the impacts of PFAS, but a decision on that has not been made.
And Ken, I'm sure viewers have a question. You drank this water. How is the health in your family?
Well, interestingly, when my mom was in her mid-20s, she got thyroid cancer. And when I was in my early 20s, I had half my thyroid removed.
And that's one of those conditions?
That's one of the 6 conditions, yeah. Wow. Obviously, you can't make a direct correlation. Right. It's impossible to do that.
More research has to be done, but
yeah, much more.
Still concerning.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll wait for those results. Yeah. Ken Kolker, thank you.
Tonight, just a handful of blood test results have come back from homeowners caught up in the Wolverine worldwide PFAS crisis. The numbers have been shocking, the highest anyone has seen anywhere. Still, the debate continues over the need to test the blood of everybody who drank that tainted water. It was that debate that led Target 8 investigator Ken Kolker, who spent part of his childhood in Rockford, to test his own blood for PFAS. Tonight, he's here with his results and what they mean. Ken?
Yeah, Marley, these results came in sooner than we thought. It took about a month instead of the 2 months that we expected. They show I've got PFAS in my system, slightly higher levels of one of the PFAS compounds than the average American. I guess I'm trying to figure out what these numbers mean.
Yeah, so I would say bad news and good news. The bad news is that, yes, you have PFAS compounds in your blood serum, like probably 95% of the rest of the American population.
My test was for the 2 most widely studied compounds of PFAS, PFOS and PFOA. It cost me $675. My PFOS level came in at 7.4 parts per billion, above the national average of 6.3. But my PFOA levels came in less than 1 part per billion, half the national average.
The good news, Ken, is that I would have a hard time picking your blood results out of a lineup.
He can't say the same, though, for Sandy Winstelt, whose blood PFAS levels were the highest seen anywhere, ever, 5,000 parts per billion.
But the findings were much better when we tested the bottled water being handed out to Parchment residents.
Tiger 8 investigator Ken Kolker has covered the PFAS crisis in West Michigan for years now. He's live in our Kalamazoo studio with the findings. Ken?
Brian and Sue, the results we found at the Kalamazoo River were high enough to merit a health advisory, though that's a decision made by health officials. Target 8 tested for the likely carcinogen in Kalamazoo River water at D Avenue. That's about 2 miles downstream from Parchment's contaminated wells, which in turn are just down from the suspected PFAS source, a former paper mill and landfill. We use kits and instructions from Trident Labs in Holland, one of 2 in the state that tests for PFAS. Today, Trident reported it found more than 21 parts per trillion in that river water. That's higher than the levels on the Rogue River in Rockford, downstream from its PFAS source, Wolverine Worldwide. The state limit for surface water is 12 because the chemicals accumulate in fish. Already, state fish advisories warn against eating fish from this stretch of the Kalamazoo River, but that's because of PCBs, not PFAS. We also tested 2 bottles of Ice Mountain, the water being handed out in Parchment, bottles that Gary Burnham had gotten last week from the distribution center. Some viewers, including Burnham, wondered if they were safe. They came back perfectly clean, no PFAS.
That's good. Big relief, you know, especially when you find out your regular water you drink all your life is contaminated.
He learned today that his private well is ripe with PFAS.
I believe it was 148.
Parts per trillion, a lot less than Parchment's municipal wells, but still more than double the EPA level for safe drinking, which means he'll stick with bottled water for now.
Corn on the cob took 15 bottles.
Now, the Kalamazoo County Health Department refused to discuss our findings. In an email, the DEQ says it started testing the Kalamazoo River on Monday, though it likely won't get the results for at least a week. It said tests of the river near Allegan 5 years ago found lower levels of PFAS. Back to you. Brian and Sue, the Ford Airport is in Cascade Township, just uphill from the Thornapple River and from hundreds of homes that get their water from wells. The potential for disaster is always there, which means airport firefighters must be prepared. Help me! A former airport fire chief says he started using the foam in the late 1970s, mostly for training, at what was then the Kent County International Airport, not knowing what it could mean 40 years later. There was this 1979 disaster drill.
It didn't take the foam-spewing trucks long to smother the blaze.
A tip led Target 8 to track down 3 former airport fire chiefs, 2 of them in Florida.
We used it a lot, all the time.
I mean, how many times over your 10 years do you figure you used firefighting foam at the airport?
Probably 1,000 times or so.
More than 15,000 gallons, he says, during his decade at the airport. They say it drained, untreated, into the ground.
It would go out this way. So here's the Thornapple River.
Yep.
And it would drain like this way down this creek.
It's called aqueous film forming foam, or AFFF, first made by 3M. It has led to PFAS contamination at as many as 200 military bases across the country, at an airport in Alaska, and at every airport in Australia. A recent survey of airports in the U.S. found that most had used the foam and let it drain into the ground.
Anytime there's wells around an airport, that should be a flag.
The PFAS compounds are similar to those in the Wolverine Worldwide water crisis that has spread into an area 6 miles long and 5 miles wide in northern Kent County. But that was caused by Scotchgard, also made by 3M, which Wolverine used to treat shoes. Wolverine dumped it in sludge decades ago. Experts say PFAS is almost indestructible in the environment. It won't go away, and it can stay in the human body for years. A study has found probable links to testicular and kidney cancer, ulcerative colitis, thyroid problems, high cholesterol, and hypertension in pregnancy. Before he became the airport fire chief in 1979, Glenn Lathers was an Air Force firefighter. That's when he first started using the foam.
I distinctly remember them talking about how safe it was. So we didn't need to take any special precautions.
He says he used it at K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base in the UP, which the state has identified as a PFAS plume. At Wurtsmith Air Force Base in Escoda, PFAS from AFFF that was used decades ago has led to foam on a lake, fish that can't be eaten, and contaminated wells. But I mean, if it's like Wurtsmith like this, would you expect it to be like this at the Ford Airport?
Yes. Yeah, yes, and any airport, any air base, or former air base, this would be a problem.
Why, that is our pit right there.
Aerial photographs from the 1990s show where Ford Airport firefighters trained for 2 decades, required by the FAA. They also trained firefighters from other airports and from local fire departments. Would that be the charring?
Oh yeah, that's all from the heat and the flames and the oil and everything else that we burned.
Former Fire Chief Brian Kimball first started at the airport as a firefighter in 1979.
We had pit fires, literally pits in the ground.
They doused old pallets with contaminated airplane fuel, then set it on fire. The foam mixed with water worked best on fuel fires.
That was the mindset when they first came out. This is the greatest invention since peanut butter.
In a fuel fire, it's the vapors that burn, not the liquid. The foam would spread across the fuel and seal in the vapors.
When you hit a flammable liquid with it, it worked now. It would shut the fire down now.
And what was it like?
Mr. Bubble, soap suds. That's what it reminded you of.
In the early 1980s, the airport lined the pit with cement and built a mock plane for crash drills. Lathers recalls using the foam twice on small plane crashes at the Ford in the 1980s, both near the runway. By 2000, the airport stopped practicing with the foam, and firefighters started training at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. The Ford Airport is about 800 feet above sea level, but the elevation drops quickly 130 feet toward homes into the Thornapple River.
Well, that's similar to House Street, where the landfill was way on top of the high ground, and then it slopes down to the Grand River.
It was Grand Valley State University professor Rick Radesky's work that helped lead the state to start investigating Wolverine Worldwide's PFAS dumping on House Street in Belmont.
Well, I'd be very concerned because the airport's built on fill, and it's also built on very permeable soil, because they want all the water to, spread out and run off.
There are more than 400 homes in the neighborhood downhill from the airport, most built in the 1970s and 1980s, some worth more than $1 million, most on well water.
Well, you're going to have to test the houses, and if you don't find anything, then you're going to have to figure out where it's gone, because it was there, it was applied there, and you need to figure out where it's going.
What would you say to the people drinking that well water?
I would tell them to stop and drink bottled water that's been filtered. Until it's ruled out, I would have to believe it's there.
The airport CEO today told Target 8 he first became aware of the potential for PFAS contamination there a year ago. He says he plans to work with the county and the DEQ.
And we know that we used it, and it's a matter, a matter of the extent of how it would get absorbed. Could it get into the groundwater? I'm sure it's possible, and that's what we need to investigate and help address.
Now, within the last hour, the state fire marshal told us that he is working with 1,000 fire departments around the state regarding their use of this foam. The state acknowledged it might be the source of PFAS found in groundwater. They hope to come up with a plan of how to dispose of it properly to prevent further contamination. Now, tonight at 11, the former fire chiefs we talked to question why the local airport didn't act sooner, and Target 8 discovers this mysterious foam on a creek near the airport, launching a state investigation. Brian Marley at the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base. The U.S. government spent $3 million on a filter system targeting just one of many PFAS hotspots.
This is granular activated carbon. We have 20,000 pounds of in each one of those GAC vessels. It's like you use for your fish tank or something.
GAC, G-A-C. It stands for granular activated carbon, like in a fish tank filter, or the whole house filters Wolverine installed in hundreds of contaminated homes in Algoma and Plainfield townships, only with tanks as tall as a 2-story house. The Air Force built this plant 3 years ago, right on top of a PFAS-choked plume of groundwater.
There was a plume emanating from a former fire training area that the Air Force used firefighting foam at for years and years.
It was the fire training pit where Wurtsmith firefighters used PFAS foam to practice putting out jet fuel fires until the early 1990s. The PFAS flows from that pit toward Clark's Marsh, not far away, where the fish are filled with the likely carcinogen.
Well, you can't eat the fish. You can't even eat, you're not supposed to eat even one of those fish.
Well, thank you very much for that, Kathy.
Here, residents complain that the Air Force and state are not doing enough to clean the contamination discovered 8 years ago. The chemical has also flowed off base in other directions and into wells. It foams up on a nearby lake. So far, though, it's just the bad water flowing into Clark's Marsh that the Air Force filters are cleaning. 7 extraction wells tapped 60 feet into the groundwater form an underground wall, kind of like a good defensive line in football. The PFAS water headed for that marsh is instead sucked into a massive tank.
And then it goes through the carbon filters, which are 20,000 pounds of activated carbon. They're operated in series, so it goes through one and then the other.
About 240 gallons a minute. Then it's piped back out on the other side of that defensive line and into the groundwater bound for the marsh. Every 3 months or so, he says, Calgon Carbon vacuums out the coal from one of the tanks and incinerates the PFAS right out of it at a cost of 30 grand a trip.
This isn't cheap.
No, it's not.
More proof that it works, he says. When it started, the water came into the plant with a PFAS count of 10,000 parts per trillion, far above the danger level. Now, he says, it's less than half that.
So what is that saying about what this system's doing?
Well, it's working.
Yeah?
Yeah.
The state says it's too soon to know if any of this would work for Wolverine. It could depend on geology and what else is in the water.
So we're, looking at all sorts of options. We, in Rockford, as in here, you heard him talk about several different potential options here. So we aren't sure what the solution is going to be yet. We aren't sure how effective those options are going to be and which one will be best, but we're going to work on it.
Wolverine's PFAS is from the Scotchgard it used to treat shoes at its tannery in Rockford. It dumped it in sludge at landfills and on farm fields decades ago. Wolverine's PFAS zone has grown to 5 miles long and 5 miles wide, roughly twice the Wurtsmith area. It has spread into 400 wells in Algoma and Plainfield townships, some with the highest PFAS levels anyone has ever seen, far higher than at Wurtsmith. The levels are highest at Wolverine's old tannery site, and it's leaking into the Rogue River.
I guess I don't understand why it wouldn't work in a place like the Rockford area with the Wolverine.
Depends on the size of the plume, how many of these you would need.
Yeah.
But the Air Force says its fish tank system isn't a quick fix.
What we're looking at is it takes, many years.
So this is not short term?
No.
In the face of pressure from the state, the Air Force says it plans to build a second treatment plant at Wurtsmith, twice the size of the first, on top of another plume of bad groundwater, and it hopes to start using that in August. I'm Target 8 investigator Ken Kolker.
Target 8 investigator Ken Kolker has covered this issue from the start, and he joins us live from Washington tonight. Ken?
The hearing here in the nation's capital wrapped up just a few hours ago, but it was clear from lawmakers that there was a sense of urgency. And for good reason. A Target 8 analysis of state reports shows nearly 1.6 million people in Michigan are drinking public water with at least trace amounts of the likely carcinogen.
Is that acceptable?
No, it's not, especially because we haven't even set the standard for what's safe and what's not safe.
Among the cities with those trace amounts, Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, and Wyoming. Those numbers don't include hundreds of tainted private wells in places like Belmont, near Parchment, and near the Wurtsmith Air Force Base.
If I were somebody that had PFAS in my water, I'd drink bottled water until I knew what a safe level was.
Michigan's PFAS leader was among 7 experts who appeared before members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee.
This is a national issue. The states can't do it all. We need our federal partners. We need our Congress.
Michigan's 3 congressional committee members, a Democrat and 2 Republicans, say they are working together.
Flint was a wake-up call for the conscience of every one of us, and we're going to fight to get this handled.
Both Michigan Republicans on the committee praised the EPA for its response in Parchment, where high PFAS levels forced 3,000 people to drink bottled water for a month. But they say the EPA needs tougher standards, more than just an advisory level for safe drinking.
Absolutely, it has to be enforceable. When people turn on their water, they want it to be safe.